You're listening to author Jason Lee Willis read The Alchemist Stone. This is part 6, Metallicus de Terra. Chapter 72, The Tower of London, England, December 1697. Pierre Charles LeSueur marked another day of imprisonment, 176 days. Outside, daylight arrived late. The snow that fell overnight did not melt. The little fire across the room barely reached him in his cell. Even though the days after the attack had been a blur, he remembered making port and being carried on a stretcher on a smaller ship to be taken up a river, the Thames. He could still smell the river somewhere nearby, even if he could not see it, but the traffic upon it diminished. Could there be ice? He'd been unconscious when he was brought to his cell, still nursing a head wound, but even though he could not be certain, he knew enough English history to know he was being kept in the Tower of London. It was neither a dank, dripping dungeon nor a crowded, chaotic prison. From what his senses could tell him, he was a few floors off the ground in a circular tower. The metal bars of his cell were placed within a larger room, as if it had been an oversight considered at the last moment. He was certainly in a prison, but not a part meant to hold hardened criminals. He had a comfortable bed, a table and a chair, and a deck of playing cards to keep his mind occupied. And nearby, the clinking of coins echoed endlessly. There were 3 British prison fellows who tended to his needs, and not one of them seemed to resemble the pirates who had taken him prisoner. Even though he could not look out them, several windows in a larger room followed light into his room. His ears helped his mind paint a mental image of what he could not see. From the flow of river traffic, he could tell the River Thames was south of his tower. He also knew he was in the corner of the prison complex with the sounds of the city coming predominantly from the west. He could still hear commotion to the east, but it was patterned and regular, all indicating that he was not being kept in the White Tower. Nor was there a trial. If he was an enemy of England, they would have shown him that courtesy within the first month. Now months of imprisonment dragged on without so much as an explanation why they were keeping him. If he had been a prisoner of war, they would have thrown him in with the general population in some overcrowded hole in the ground. Yet his cell had been built to keep his health, not deprive him of it. And then there were the coins. At first, LeSueur imagined pirates counting their wealth in a large chest of coins. But once he realized he was in the heart of a city, that image vanished from his mind. Next, he pictured a bank, which explained the delicate nature of the 3 men who guarded him. All 3 seemed comfortable in their positions on the 3rd floor, but none of them seemed to have anything to do with banking. In fact, the 3 men would often bring coins to the table and set up on the 3rd floor. Finally, after a week, LeSueur realized where he was being kept. The Royal Mint. It explained its secure place within the Tower of London complex, as well as its need for a series of cells in the 3rd floor for counterfeiters. Whoever kept him prisoner wanted him secure and safe. His captors brought him freshly sliced ham and some eggnog. "From my wife," one of them said. "It is Christmas, after all." "Thank you," LeSueur said, relishing every nibble of the salted pork. Even though he wasn't starving, 6 months of prison food had left him lean. And midway through Christmas Day, a stranger walked into his room. He fit the part of an English gentleman, wearing layers of velvet with frilly white undershirts that sprouted out of his collar and cuffs. The man had wavy brown hair that cascaded onto his shoulders and a narrow face that was clean-shaven and delicate. His shiny boots, the only thing remotely intimidating about the man, echoed loudly as he stepped through the door. LeSueur almost leapt to his feet, and so did the guard. "Warden Newton, to what do I owe this pleasure?" and behind Newton, a hunchback stepped through the doorway wearing modest peasant attire. Newton spoke to the guard. "It is Christmas, Robert. You have a wife and family at home, and I have none. We will keep watch over the prisoner while you enjoy the holiday." "But it's your birthday." "As well as Christ's birthday, and many of an even more unsavory nature with whom I share a common bond," Newton added. "I've been avoiding my duties here at the Royal Mint in recent months, and I certainly owe His Majesty more dedication. I see it as an honor to relieve you on Christmas Day. Go, Robert. Our prisoner will be safe on my watch." For a moment, LeSueur hoped the two men were part of some elaborate charade to rescue him. But as Newton grew closer to his cell, LeSueur spotted an ornate ebony brooch with two white femur bones crossed. "Monsieur LeSueur," Newton began, "I have you in custody for possessing counterfeit coins. I realize it is a ridiculous charge without merit, but as warden of the Royal Mint, it certainly allows me to keep you here without any questions. Time has also given me an opportunity to evaluate your worth. They made me a fellow at Trinity College for solving the great riddles of mathematics and physics, but you have been an even greater puzzle to solve." "I'm just a simple woods runner," Newton cackled. "Simple? No. Bernard has told me everything about you. You cannot fool me. Under that brutish exterior of yours is a cunning mind, shifting allegiances to suit your purpose. It's hard for me to even know if your loyalty is to the Jesuits or to Eos. Bernard argued that killing you would be the best plan, but there are important matters I'd like to discuss. Let's speak of the Philosopher's Stone." LeSueur sat and blinked. I think that is the madness in your method. I really do. I am not even sure why you seek the lapis auxiliar. But then it finally dawned on me. Revenge. A man like you, hardened by the brutal realities of the wilderness, does not really care about such matters. You simply want revenge against the one who killed your master. I can give you revenge. How do you know you are not the man I wish to kill? How do I know you are not the man I wish to kill? Newton chuckled. I can assure you that I had nothing to do with the death of your master, Father Marquette. Jacques Marquette was murdered by a man named Bartolome St. Clair, who comes from a powerful criminal organization known as the Order of Eos, steered by Marco Alvarez. He is in league with Etienne Delhat and the rest of your pack of friends back in Montreal. Do you know why Father Marquette was murdered? Does it matter now? Yes, it does. It matters to me. As you are probably well aware, the more knowledge one has on a matter, the more difficult it is to discern black and white. Once, 19 generations ago, the cause was united behind a single purpose, to discover the truth behind the Philosopher's Stone. But a funny thing happened when we did learn the truth. It ruined us. Our mighty elm split in two. A few years ago, when I learned the truth, it almost drove me mad. At first, I fainted, and then my mind almost split in two. Not only did I learn the truth about the Philosopher's Stone, but then I juxtaposed it against what I knew about the end times. LeSueur winced, catching Newton's eye. Like you, I was raised by a God-fearing man who gave me a clear sense of right and wrong and black and white. I'm no heathen like the Order of Eos cult. Newton finally sat back down beside his silent hunchback companion. Thanks to Bernard's spy network, I feel like I've been out on the frontier with you. I've read about the fearsome Sioux and the fearless Chippewa, both with a paradoxical 7 fires. Having studied Scripture as vigorously as I've studied any other subject, it was hard for me not to appreciate the religious symbolism of their struggle. 7 archangels, 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls of wrath. There are 55 sevens in the book of Revelation, but the 7 fires of the Chippewa was like finding a long-lost piece of a puzzle under the table. What does it matter, LeSueur? Doesn't such talk interest you? I spared your life for a good reason. Don't be so sullen. I am locked like an animal in a cage. Of course. With your brute strength, you could probably kill me with your bare hands before you realize I'm an ally, not an enemy. An ally? Why do I find that difficult to believe? You gave the order to have all those men killed by your hired pirates. How does that not make you my enemy? I stand in opposition, but only because Gonzales and Alvarez are misguided. The Jesuits and the Order of Eos. What does he want? Newton continued. Good and evil are far more difficult to perceive than I ever imagined. Take your Indian tribes, for example. The Sioux are sworn to defend, the Chippewa are sworn to discover. But which cause is good and which is evil? It once was like this within my organization, but then both trees were splintered by schism, creating countless branches of interpretation. You're speaking in metaphors. Talk plainly. As you insist. The world is coming to an end in the year 2060. When the comet finally returns for a final time. Newton declared this with a wry smile on his face, and then, almost apologetically, flipped up his hands. Yes, it will appear again in 1759, 1835, 1910, and 1986. But who can stand against the will of God? Will you? No, I am not the Wishwe. How could I be? I'm stuck in another prison cell even further away from the haunted valley. Newton continued. I gained fame and notoriety trying to understand the nature of that damned comet, but I had to know. For taking a bite of that apple, I am now cursed, he said, holding the black brooch. But here's the question that will drive you mad. Knowing the date? Do you serve the prophecy? Or do you try to stop the prophecy? I'm not quite sure I understand, LeSueur admitted when it seemed Newton waited on his answer. Do you believe in God? Yes. And having been raised Catholic and taught by Father Marquette, do you believe in the Holy Scriptures? Yes. Then you are certainly aware that the Book of Daniel, the 4 Gospels, and the Book of Revelation all describe the coming of an Antichrist prior to the return of Jesus, Armageddon, and Judgment Day. Of course. A frightening figure, the Antichrist. Are you familiar with it? Yes. Now, I understand that you are French and Catholic, and I am English and Protestant. But if the Antichrist was sitting where Bernard sits, would you agree that both of us would find common cause to stand against him? Yes. Exactly. Newton snapped his fingers and pointed at LeSueur. See, there is a common purpose between us after all. Marco Alvarez and the Order of Eos might belong to the same tree as me, but we are far apart on different branches. He seeks the Philosopher's Stone so that men like himself can sit upon the throne as a god. Eos would raise up the Antichrist and convince the world it was something glorious. And the great whore Babylon, the Catholic Church, she means to claim the stone so that she can keep the throne, the one intended for Christ. These are my enemies. You're going to frighten him, the hunchback sang out. I'm sorry. Bernard is right. Here I am babbling on when I should be getting to the point. For decades now, alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone have been a puzzle I've been trying to solve, but you've been to the mythical land of the Undine. You've seen the vitriol. You've stood in the place wise King Solomon sought. Tell me about it. Newton waited for a moment before growing impatient. Please, LeSueur, I hold your life in my hands. I'm not trying to entrap you. Just describe it to me. I never gazed upon the stone itself, only the vitriol surrounding it. The place, Newton snapped. Tell me about the place. The haunted valley? LeSueur asked, and upon uttering the words, Newton smiled broadly. The vitriol was located in a valley, shaped like a bowl. Into this bowl, there were several small rivers that came in from all directions, meeting at the center near the base of a bluff. I found the vitriol on the other side of the bluff. Do the rivers cut through the haunted valley? Do they exit it? Yes, their currents join together and flow due north, where they join a larger river, sending it flowing back to the north also. Newton locked eyes with his hunchback and shook his head, who shook his head also. Tell me about the land surrounding this haunted valley. Is it mountainous? No, there are no mountains in the area. In fact, the land around it is quite flat, a prairie filled with wildflowers and grass. And the bluff at the center, what type of rock? Mostly just sandstone, a type slightly denser than the walls surrounding the valley. I've read all about your travels in the frontier in your youth. Have you explored these lands north of the haunted valley? That's Sioux territory. Yet, according to all accounts, you're the only man alive who would dare enter Sioux territory and negotiate with these savages. The Order of Eos is lost without you, so they claim in their letters. What do you know of the Sioux homeland? Is it mountainous? No, it's land filled with forests, lakes, and rivers. But no mountains. The hunchback sighed impatiently, and Newton gave him a stern look that did little to shake him. You'll have to excuse me. Like yourself, I have only recently joined this tale, while Bernard was born into it. I have one other question which needs answering. Do you still have my map? Newton's gaze was unflinching. Possible leverage? What does this man want from me? This is the first time I've ever met you. How could I... Back to the elm, Newton said. There were two artifacts. The Almaric map was kept by the French king, who believed it was made by King Solomon himself, which is likely true. The second map, known as the Aberon map, kept by the English king, was crude but included details much different than its sister map. The English guardians, dubbed the Priory of Ormus, kept it for centuries, until a Jesuit plot stole the map while the rest of the country was distracted by some explosives found under the Parliament building. It is my belief that the Jesuits gave it to their explorers, men like Father Marquette. You've been dealt a valuable card, LeSueur. Please tell me you didn't just give it away to Eos. It's hidden. It's secure. Newton clasped his hands together. Well, that is the best Christmas present you could have given me. Bernard, could you fetch supper and bring it here? I'll be dining with Monsieur LeSueur this evening. Bernard coldly nodded and left. Now, why don't you tell me about this map? And then I'll tell you all about the Philosopher's Stone. An exchange of presents instead of death and mayhem, like civilized men. Chapter 73, Montreal, New France, 1698. Bartholomew St. Clair stared at his food while the other men devoured it as if they'd not had a meal in weeks. Savages. One by one, the men gathered around Charles Le Moyne's table noticed him holding his silver fork above the plate without taking action, and they paused to take stock of the unrequited social act. The last to notice were the youngest boys, Jean-Baptiste and Antoine, now teenagers. Is there something on your mind, Monsieur St. Clair? Charles Le Moyne asked from across the table. St. Clair looked down at his frozen fork and quickly set it down. My apologies. You are our honored guest, Charles said, It was wrong of us to celebrate without first consulting you. Would you like to go somewhere else to talk? I feel like the Grim Reaper interrupting a birthday party, St. Clair said. The War of the Grand Alliance stole 3 brothers from this table since the last time I dined with you, and I should be celebrating its end with you. I should have had the sense to wait until you were all finished. My brothers are always hungry. This celebration is more for your return than it is to celebrate the end of the war. Charles picked up his napkin, wiped his chin, and set it on the plate, followed by his 4 or 5 younger brothers. Give us news, St. Clair. Our enemies celebrate victory and plan the next phase of the war, St. Clair began. If we are not careful, we'll suffer catastrophic defeat. I don't understand, Charles said. We defended the colony and threw back the English. Our alliances with the native tribes have grown stronger. We've done well along the St. Lawrence, St. Clair admitted. But we lost the colony territory of Acadia in the east and Hudson Bay in the north. And Delhut remains stuck on his island in the west. At this, Pierre Lemoyne jumped in. We didn't lose Hudson Bay. I wiped those English forts off the map again and again and again. The politicians lost Hudson Bay. Exactly, St. Clair added. After 9 years, our enemy is much, much stronger. The last Catholic king has fled England, which is now forever ruled by Protestants. Instead of a bloody civil war, the Priory of Ormuz has now placed puppets on the throne who will act as directed. Each day we are at peace with England allows the Priory to grow stronger. New France has 5,000 colonists, whereas New England has 250,000. And you speak of native alliances? I thought matters in the East were ready, Charles said. I thought the seeds planted in the American colonies had also taken root. The Free States have a new presider, and he is doing his part to prepare the final stages. Alvarez's plans for the American colonies are also advancing, but they have not had enough time to bear fruit. Have you heard of the Ganji Swai? Only Joseph Lemoyne showed understanding. The ship was attacked by pirates. It carried Emperor Rangzeb's sister. The one who was raped and killed? Pierre asked. But, St. Clair, that was done by American pirates. How does this affect us? St. Clair shook his head. The pirates were from the Free States, led by a former presider, Thomas II. The Mogul emperor now knows the truth, and with his large reward has turned all eyes towards Madagascar, including English eyes. The new leader of the Priory of Ormuz has seized upon this opportunity to bribe pirates and create new fleets to combat piracy. It is how he managed to imprison LeSueur. LeSueur's alive? Charles asked. How do you know this? Our friend and ally, Alexander LeSueur, has been negotiating his release. But at what price? LeSueur is a traitor. How could you say that? Joseph snapped angrily. He's a hero. All of Quebec saw what he did when rescuing Jacques. He's our brother-in-law for... Against all my better judgments, I ignored the name LeSueur for too long. He was Don to Father Marquette when both Joseph and Pierre rose from their seats for a confrontation. But before they took 2 steps toward St. Clair, the folds of his sleeves released the knives which leapt to his maimed hands. One knife rose to the neck of Joseph, while the other pointed into the face of advancing Pierre. Sit back down, Charles Lemoyne said to his upset brothers. Have you lost your minds? I'll not have him sullying the name LeSueur, Joseph said, leaning back into his chair. LeSueur has explained all of that to us, Pierre added, also retreating. With a flick, the knives returned as St. Clair calmly continued. No, LeSueur lied to all of us. He is either an agent of the Jesuits or the periphery. And with a stolen map in his possession, he's the one who made alliances with the Sioux and befriended Delhut. Now, this traitor is in an English prison, selling his secrets to the highest bidder. I find this hard to believe, Charles supported his younger brothers. LeSueur's family, and has proven his loyalty again and again. The traitor is Captain Darcy, who openly plotted against LeSueur. He's not a traitor. He hid and took a false name, knowing I was out there looking for him. If I'd only trusted my instincts, he'd be dead and your sweet cousin would be married to some businessman. Now all of our efforts are about to be smashed because of him. In the west, Delhut is bottled up, unable to proceed. With Hudson Bay lost, we cannot use the Red River to sneak in the back door. But our English enemies can now begin preparations for that very thing. The Red River? How does that come into play? Here we are, celebrating 3 centuries of investment, and none of you understand. Don't you know our history? St. Clair asked. From Hudson Bay, there is a river that drains from the west, connecting to a massive lake, which is fed by the Red River. It is a back door behind the Sioux and us. Yes, there are all sorts of small rivers, Pierre admitted, but there is no northern waterway into the frontier. Get a map and I'll show you what the English are thinking, St. Clair said. Antoine bolted from the room, and a minute later came back with a large framed map which he put on the table, and all the Lemoynes gathered around St. Clair. Here, St. Clair said, putting his finger upon Fort Nelson on Hudson Bay. This river drains from the west, and there is a large river, and from the land of the Sioux, the Red River drains into it. The English will send their forces up into this waterway and catch all of us by surprise, while Delhut sits on his island in Lake Superior. St. Clair's eyes went to the Great Lakes region upon the map. So much had changed since the death of Marquette, and the unknown became detailed. From Lake Superior, he saw Father Hennepin portage to the St. Croix, a trip which had almost cost him his life in a Sioux pyre. At Green Bay, he saw a route coming out of Perot's old camp. From southern shore of Lake Michigan, he saw a third route and portage, including Fort La Rocher, where he'd found Marquette. Beyond the Mississippi, white paper extended to the west, with no known details beside legends and lore. Winnipeg. St. Clair suddenly remembered the name of the lake that joined the 2 waterways together, but as his nailless finger went ahead to prepare his point, he gasped at what he saw. Where did you get this? In the other room, Louis Lemoyne answered. No, this map. This isn't the Hennepin map, is it? Charles accepted the question. No, it's a newer map, with a newer interpretation of the Great Lakes. I found it helpful in understand... Who? St. Clair repeated. Who? Some Italian fellow? Charles answered, sensing the fury in St. Clair. He took the newest maps available and combined them all to produce a larger map of the entire region. So you're seeing a bit of Aloise, LaSalle, Franklin, Hennepin, Joliet, DeBlanc... Joliet! St. Clair slammed his hand down on the table, finishing Charles's explanation. Joseph Lemoyne leaned in to try to understand the mystery. St. Clair straightened his back, wrapping his hands into his armpits as he fumed. He took a deep breath, calming his heart as his training had taught him. When he unfolded his arms, a knife appeared in his right hand, but not as a weapon, as an illustration. When I began my mission to stop the Jesuit ambitions, we took the fastest route, going up the St. Lawrence to Lake Ontario and then Lake Erie. After finding the Detroit River, we camped upon the shore of a large round lake, which had once been the home of the Chippewa. My companion and I planned to stay a day or two to restock our supplies before continuing our hunt when a group of canoes came downstream. Spotting a native was a regular occurrence, but seeing European stock excited us, as it did them, seeing us dressed as Jesuits. Imagine the divine thrill of learning that the party included half of the men who discovered the upper Mississippi with Marquette. The leader of the party was none other than Louis Joliet, one of the men we'd been sent to kill. Yet, greatly outnumbered, we kept our wits and gleaned information. In a private moment, it was decided that I would continue upstream to search for Marquette where Joliet described. Valancourt was given instruction to search their belongings for the stolen Aberon map, and if prudent, take the life of Joliet so that his discovery could not be relayed. I remember the accident, Charles Lemoyne said. They were coming down the rapids of Lachine when disaster struck, claiming the lives of the expedition. Yet Joliet survived, St. Clair said, and with the tip of his knife pointed to the label given to the round lake, Lac de St. Clair. I apologize to your family, your entire family, including your cousin and her husband. All these years I assumed Pierre-Charles LeSueur had been the thorn in my side, relaying information to our enemies. But it was Louis Joliet who gave my name to the mapmaker. He's put it there for the world to see. St. Clair dropped back down into his chair, suddenly exhausted. What does this mean? Charles asked for his brothers. That means I was wrong. It means your trust in LeSueur was genuine. It means I was mistaken about LeSueur. It means I need to be visiting Louis Joliet. What does this mean for our plans? Delhut has armed the Chippewa and is awaiting orders, but LeSueur is in an English prison on fabricated charges. Oh, that? St. Clair said, filled with so much rage that he almost couldn't think straight. Isn't it obvious? With the English in the north and the Sioux bottled up in the Great Lakes, the most obvious route is to finish what LaSalle started. A southern route? Pierre clarified. With a small expeditionary force, men we trust, we can establish a fort on the Mississippi Delta, which King Louis would certainly fund. Now that the war is over, we can control the entire river, something the Sioux would not anticipate. Delhut will keep them distracted, and we will sail men up behind their lines. Is there anyone besides LeSueur we could send? Charles shook his head. Then I will write to Alvarez, explain to him how we need to apply pressure to release LeSueur. But instead of sending him back to Montreal, we will do the unexpected. He will sail directly for the Gulf of Mexico. Is it settled? The men nodded. Now you can bring me supper, St. Clair said, and tell me what you know about Louis Joliet. Chapter 74. London, England, 1699. Isaac Newton maintained his morning routine and read alone upon his couch as he sipped his morning coffee. News both trivial and pertinent passed by his eyes to be locked away in his mental vault and accessed later. What else is there to do? He rose a few minutes earlier than usual, tossed the rest of the papers on the table, and walked to the stairs that descended to the second floor of his estate. Already at breakfast table, his trusted companions patiently waited for their routine to begin also. Bonamane, avunculis, his niece, Catherine Barton, greeted him in Latin, rising to peck his cheek and help him transition to his chair. How are you? Lovely, just lovely. His other companion, Bernard Claremont, did not even look up. He's still upset with me. Whereas Bernard was twisted and hideous, Catherine was angelic and regal, more of a queen than anyone who recently sat upon the throne. For the past 3 years, she'd helped him manage his public political agenda as Warden of the Mint, transitioning from the role of a minister into one where he could investigate and arrest rivals with impunity. Any bit of gossip in London filtered through Catherine's nets to be relayed over breakfast. Even as she chatted away, Newton could not concentrate on her words, thinking only of the French hulk locked away in the tower. Finally, in a brief moment between scandals, Newton cleared his throat and declared, I've decided to return him to LeSueur. Return him? Bernard repeated in protest. The big Frenchman? Catherine clarified, also in protest. I know what you are thinking, Newton said, that he knows too much, especially after all our conversations together. But this Gordian knot set before me might best be solved with brute force rather than pulling at loose threads. Is LeSueur an agent of chaos and uncertainty? Absolutely, but sitting back and waiting will only cause the situation to worsen. Catherine reached over to touch his hand. Why isn't killing him an option? A short-term victory that would make matters only worse. The Order of Eos has hidden in the shadows for 300 years, and now that they are no longer afraid of the light, they will make themselves vulnerable. Regardless of what LeSueur does, all of their attention will be drawn to him, making our plans all but invisible. Bernard waited for several beats before asking, and if he succeeds? The thought put a smile on Newton's face, causing him to look down to hide it. He certainly will have overcome great odds. Releasing him publicly will put a bright light upon him, drawing all sorts of moths to the flame. While we will have contingency plans, I'm certain our enemies will be far more aggressive. But if all these redundancies do fail, peace treaties are meant to be broken. And if we must, we will sweep the continent with fire and brimstone before I'll allow the Order of Eos to succeed. Releasing LeSueur forces our enemy to use him, and it makes us look foolish and weak. And you want that? Bernard asked. Of course he wants that, Catherine said. I've read about a type of North American marsupial that, when surrounded by enemies, emits a foul stench, rolls over on his back, and then feigns death in front of the jaws of a wolf or bear. If our enemies think we're dead or weak, they will underestimate us when it comes time to strike. A strange but apt metaphor, my dear, Newton said, turning to the scowling Bernard. What will happen when I release LeSueur? Walk me through it. He'll go to the French ambassador, secure passage, and then return to Paris, Bernard began. But without a ship, crew, or funds, he'll have to go back to LeSueur. Of course, he has no access to Hudson Bay with the Sioux blocking the Great Lakes. He'll have no other choice but to take the southern route up through Louisiana. Yes, of course, Newton agreed. Why wouldn't he sail back from Montreal to see his wife and family? LeSueur is the only one with the talent and knowledge to go deep into Sioux territory. It's the last card he can play. He's made a fortune from fur trade, Newton countered. But the new governor, in an attempt to seal power from the Lemoyne family, has restricted fur trade as part of the Treaty of Ryswick. What else is there to do but to release him? Newton asked aloud. Have you grown fond of him? Catherine asked. LeSueur was not born into this quest for the Philosopher's Stone. So, after our conversations, I hope he now has a better understanding of what the Order of Eos wants with it. While it is impossible to know a man, I feel relatively certain I know that LeSueur will do when he finds it. Besides, I have ways to control this experiment. Set him free, Bernard, and send him on his way. Chapter 75, Fort Maurepas, Louisiana, January 1st, 1700. Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne felt the rum still swirling in his empty belly, and as soon as he sat up, his stomach rebelled against his efforts to celebrate the new year. Stumbling out into the front yard of the fort, he braced for vomiting by putting both hands on his upper thighs. Wiping away the mucus and saliva from his chin, Jean-Baptiste looked up to see if any of his men had witnessed him. There were 2 guards posted on each of the 4 tall bastions of Fort Maurepas, but with each angled tower pointing outwards, none of them saw his moment of weakness. The barracks were still silent, meaning It was at least an hour before breakfast. A little column of smoke came from the kitchen, but the thought of food disgusted him. He needed fresh air. The grassy bluff on which he and his brother Pierre had built the fort the previous March had been beaten down to hard-packed dirt with planks serving as sidewalks when the rains turned the inner yard of the fort to mud. Having learned from the failures of LaSalle's expedition a generation earlier, the fort had been built with defensive walls that would allow the 100 men to defend themselves against Indian attacks of far superior numbers. The snowflake shape of the fort allowed snipers to defend every inch of the wall. An outer ditch, which immediately turned into a swampy moat, also served to protect them against an attack that never came. After stepping out of the southern gate, Jean-Baptiste found himself looking out onto Biloxi Bay. The rising sun, hidden behind low-hanging clouds, provided little warmth on the cool morning. But then a flicker of red and blue caught his eye. Across the channel that dumped into the bay, a thin island separating the waters of the mouth of the Biloxi from the waters of dozens of other rivers, including the Mississippi. Deer Island, as the men called it, had a few scraggly trees due to inconstant water. On the other side of the trees, something moved. A sail, mass, and moments later, another ship. He is lost. My brothers sailed right past us. Cannons! Jean-Baptiste called out to the guards, who were also just noticing the foreign shape gliding beyond the island. You want us to fire on them, sir? No. Fire off a volley so they know we are behind them. Even though he could not see the mass, Lemoyne knew the ships. The Le Marin led the way. Behind it, La Badine, another frigate, and Jean-Baptiste's own ship followed behind. A cannon blast shook the massive timbers of the fort, and a moment later 90 other men joined the celebration. Don't just stand there gawking, Jean-Baptiste shouted out when he realized he was also gawking at the two frigates turning around in the bay. Go put on your dress uniforms. My brother has returned. Even though he was still just 19, Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne had spent most of his life tagging after his older brother Pierre, who now added the title Sieur d'Iberville after being raised by Pontchartrain and given the task of colonizing the Louisiana Delta. Both frigates were forced to anchor in the channel of Biloxi Bay, and by the time the first rowboat went over the side, all 100 men of Fort Maurepas stood at attention under the French flag. Wearing plate armor over his shoulder and rich velvets underneath, Pierre stood as the rowboat neared the dock. Beside him was another brother, Joseph Lemoyne, and in front of both of them was a dead man. LeSueur! Jean-Baptiste gasped, turning to an officer. That's Pierre Charles LeSueur, the hero of Fort Frontenac. I thought he was killed by pirates, the officer said under his breath as the soldiers waited for the boat to dock. So did I, but that is definitely LeSueur. Pierre Lemoyne had left 100 of his finest men behind at Fort Maurepas back in May under the command of Valenti, but had promoted his little brother to second in command just to watch over the family interests. Now, 100 of Montreal's finest, captains, cannoneers, sailors, filibusters, mechanics, masons, hunters, and officers, stood in front of the fort that was as secure as when he'd left it the previous year. Commander Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville, the officer said once the commander stepped foot off the dock. Fort Maurepas is yours, sir. With the cargo of the two ships to unload, the rest of the day was so busy that Jean-Baptiste had little time to find out how LeSueur had managed to elude death once again. 100 soldiers from Le Marin doubled the size of the colony by afternoon, and by supper, La Badine had another 50 men with engineering talents. For a second straight night, the rum flowed and violins plucked out snappy tunes for both officer and soldier to dance and sing. Jean-Baptiste found himself sitting beside a doctor, a priest, and a major, but between himself and his brother at the head of the table, There were several strangers he did not know. But Jean-Baptiste could neither hear what was being said nor was he being involved in the conversation. So finally, when the opportunity presented itself, he stood and raised his cup. To the Bear Man, may he bring honor and glory to France, New France, and the new colony of Louisiana. To the Bear Man. To the Bear Man, the crowd repeated. So what will you do now? Jean-Baptiste asked privately. LeSueur glanced up at Pierre before speaking. I suppose there is no point in keeping any of it a secret. I've been granted a license by Farmer General LeSueur to travel up the Mississippi River to open a copper mine. Copper? Jean-Baptiste's own question was lost in the upwelling of others equally confused. It was the dream of Frontenac and LaSalle to use the Mississippi as a route to unite the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. I've been given a dozen of the best miners in all of Europe to establish an outpost, and thanks to your brother's support, I'll have another 20 men to serve as security for our journey north. Pierre Le Moyne immediately smiled, but spoke softly to LeSueur under his breath. Jean-Baptiste seized upon the moment. Brother, I would like to volunteer to join LeSueur's expedition up the Mississippi. And then the stranger beside Pierre whispered something to his brother, who smiled and nodded. I'm sure a majority of Fort Maurepas would volunteer to join LeSueur on another of exciting journeys, but the success of his expedition will not rely upon might, but upon stealth as he sneaks behind the front lines of the Sioux. Everyone here speaks not only of your courage, little brother, but also your leadership while I was away. LeSueur understands the dire reality of his quest, which is why I must keep as many men here to establish a firm foothold in the Delta. If the colony fails like it did for LaSalle, then it makes no difference what happens in the north. LeSueur stood. I thank you, Jean-Baptiste, for volunteering to help, but the composition of my crew has already been decided. For the dreams of Frontenac to come to fruition, we must first secure the fort from both sickness and the warring Indians. Until spring arrives, the security of Fort Maurepas should be our only concern. Jean-Baptiste sat down, followed by LeSueur. Something is wrong. And it wasn't just the absurdity of a copper mine 1,000 miles upriver. Over the next week, Jean-Baptiste heard all sorts of theories. Some men believed the story about copper was a ruse to allow LeSueur and Le Moyne to ship illegally obtained furs to the American colonies, while others told tales of gold mines far to the north. Little by little, Jean-Baptiste discovered the identities of the 20 men who were going north with LeSueur. A man named Colin Nain commanded the dozen miners who arrived on La Badine along with their equipment. Although the man spoke French, Jean-Baptiste noticed far too many anglicisms from the man. Yet the other 11 miners seemed neither French nor English, and while they kept to themselves, he began to wonder if they were Swiss. Gaston Verdi, his in-law from Montreal, would organize the supplies. 4 workers were also assigned to the expedition. Remy and Pierre Dupree were both skilled hunters who would ensure the expedition did not starve. André Pennicott, a young carpenter from La Rochelle, would oversee repairs to the felucca, the construction of the fort, and building barges for the copper ore to be sent back down the river. His brother also assigned 4 veteran soldiers to the expedition who had served under his brother Joseph Le Moyne. But still, something is wrong. It took several days before Jean-Baptiste found himself alone in the commander's office with his eldest brother. Why can't I go with LeSueur? You've always told me about the importance of families sticking together, yet you're sending him off with a bunch of strangers. Joseph is here to watch your back. Let me go with LeSueur so I can watch his back. Pierre tightened his mouth. No. But alone in his office, Jean-Baptiste stood in the doorway. LeSueur is family. Haven't I proven myself worthy? This isn't about your worth. If I'm with him, it will only bring more glory to the family. You can spare me. Do it for the family. I am doing this for the family. I'm doing this for Marguerite and her children. They are blood, not LeSueur. What is that supposed to mean? This trip is far more dangerous than you understand. Even if they manage to elude the Sioux, there is even more danger from external forces and maybe even internal forces. Even his brother understood the shady characters in the crew. We need to warn LeSueur. LeSueur loves his children and our sweet cousin, but after being captured by the English, if that story can even be believed, it is impossible for us to know where his allegiances lie. If they do manage to find this place, I will send you up the river the following summer. Until then, we wait and watch to see what happens. Understood? Jean-Baptiste nodded, knowing his brother's instincts were correct. One of the men was a spy. Chapter 76, Anticosti Island, May 1700. Hidden in plain sight. The island of Anticosti sat in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, forcing all traffic coming out of the St. Lawrence River to flow around it. For ships bound for Labrador or Newfoundland, the island sent traffic to the north of the slender island that stretched for 100 miles in the expansive mouth of the bay. For ships bound for Nova Scotia or the American colonies, the island served the same purpose. For few ships actually approached the island dubbed the Cemetery of the Gulf, but Bartolome St. Clair approached with the intention of making the island live up to its name. I will have my answers. The captain of his ship anchored in a small bay on the extreme western tip of the island. Despite a crew of 50, St. Clair watched the men carefully lower him into the small rowboat. With his back to the island, he rowed into the wind until the little boat dropped onto the shore. Despite an assassin's array of weapons at his disposal, St. Clair only carried a 6-inch blade tucked into the folds of his coat. A golden field of grass stood between him and the lush pine forest a half-mile away. Having studied the map in his cabin, St. Clair knew it would be a 7-mile walk across the tip of the island before he would come upon the little port. But as he strolled through the wilderness, his mind continued to picture another map. Lac de St. Clair, a coward's taunt. For a day, St. Clair watched the stone cottages to understand the comings and goings of little village. There were about a dozen residents, but none of them matched the appearance of his old nemesis. Finally, again dressed in the priestly robes once donned by his torturers, St. Clair walked into the village. 2 old dogs welcomed him. "Welcome, Father," Mrs. Joliet said from a doorway. "Father Kervel," St. Clair lied. "I've come to Anticosti Island seeking the illustrious hydrographer, Louis Joliet." "You found him, but he is not at home right now. Come in and rest. We did not see your ship make port." Yes, the captain seemed to be in a big hurry to get to Port Royal and set anchor a few bays to the east of here. I had to walk a few miles. A few young men came from the other stone cottages, Joliet's sons. They watched suspiciously, but did not approach. "If we had known you were coming, Father Kervel, we would have prepared supper, and I am certain they would have made sure Louis wasn't in one of his walkabouts. To Louis, walking in nature is more holy than sitting behind his pipe organ." "Ah, I also enjoy the walking in nature. When I was a younger man, I once camped beside a beautiful lake for almost a whole summer. It was truly a paradise on earth." "So what brings you to Anticosti Island?" "I am in charge of opening a new university at Kingston." "Kingston?" "Old Fort Frontenac. Now that King William's War is over, the little outpost is a thriving community. My superiors figured I could gather the finest minds. Then it would be more than compensate for living so close to the frontier. Louis taught a term at the University of Quebec, but it didn't suit him. Perhaps when he hears my offer, he will reconsider it. Kingston is located at the headwaters of the St. Lawrence River, facing Lake Ontario. It is very beautiful. I'm sure it is, but his exploring days are far in his past. Yet, he still goes out for his walkabouts. An hour later, St. Clair slurped soup made by Mrs. Joliet, still without a sign of his prey. Mrs. Joliet, you have been a gracious host, but I should be going. Captain Coburg is certainly growing impatient with me. I can send one of the boys. He is certainly walking around Lac de la Sauvage. It is straight east of here, a son offered. I think I saw it on my approach. I'll swing up to the lake on my return to that little bay where Coburg waits for me. If I find him, I'll make him my offer. But if what you tell me is true, the two of you are about to enjoy your golden years here on Anacostia Island. Good day, Madame Joliet. St. Clair walked out of the little village, and less than 2 miles away he found the little lake just as Mrs. Joliet had described it. A thin black dog ran along the distant shore, and Joliet approached him with a shouldered rifle. St. Clair approached steadily. "Hello," Joliet said once the gap closed. St. Clair waved a hand hiding his maimed fingers, which found their way into his pocket where a trusted knife waited. A bit too trusting. At 10 yards, Joliet stopped. His eyes flashed recognition of a face from 2 decades ago. The musket snapped quickly off his shoulder and onto a fire position, but not before St. Clair threw the knife into the man's chest. Despite the impact of the blade, Joliet did not drop the gun. So St. Clair dropped, only for the barrel of the gun to follow. He rolled, only to have the discharged musket ball hit the ground beside him. And then he charged. He knocked the stout old man off his feet, jerking the knife out of his chest to hold it against Joliet's throat once he managed to subdue him. "It's not time to die, Louis Joliet. We need to talk." St. Clair finished binding Joliet and rolled him over. The knife wound bubbled, meaning he would not have much time before the man's lung filled with blood. "How do you know my name?" St. Clair asked. "What?" "It was on the map. I only speak my true name to those I kill. When I met you on the shores of Round Lake, I did not give you my true name. How did you know my name?" Joliet looked down at the wound, inspecting it, discerning his own mortality. "Why couldn't you people leave me alone? I wanted no part in this game. Who gave you my name?" I tried to warn him not to ask questions, but he loved the priest like a father. I told him to keep his head low and no trouble would come to him, but he wanted answers. He gave me the name, and I foolishly put it on one of my maps. "He?" "Pierre Charles LeSueur," St. Clair muttered, and Joliet's eyes confirmed it. Despite Joliet's outstretched arms, St. Clair brought the knife down into his chest repeatedly until the blood covered them both. He didn't relish killing an innocent man. He knew he couldn't allow Joliet's body to be found in such a manner, so he dragged the body to the lake, submerged it, and stacked stones upon it so it would never be found. Chapter 77, The Ohio Delta, June 6, 1700. LeSueur stayed on the bow of the felucca, sharpening his axe. "I am a fat, juicy fly caught in a web, and we'll see which spider comes to take a bite first." After 2 months, the little ship had proven to be surprisingly versatile. Although 40 feet long, it was narrow and ran shallow. The young carpenter, Pennicott, had equipped it with 10 oar holes on each side and 2 small masts which pivoted crossbeams. Whether by sail or oar, the expedition had covered more than 600 miles in less than 2 months. The miners waited quietly on shore. LeSueur now knew most of their names, even though he only gave orders through Colin Nain. Castle, Motz, Orel, Hagen, Lufar, and a dozen others. Newton's men, most likely. But what else was I to do? But the men with the guns were worse. Before departing France for the new colony, Pierre Le Moyne filled his ship with hardy men of low repute. Of those, the worst were given to LeSueur. Michael Cassier, Louis Levine, and Leon Tyre went through the food stores so quickly that they had to camp along the Ohio River or face starvation in a few more weeks. Matthew Sajan, their sergeant, somehow always found a little more alcohol hidden away. Order of Eos men. The Dupree brothers, who were out hunting for game as LeSueur sharpened his axe, seemed decent but simple fellows. When treachery reared its ugly head, and LeSueur knew that day would soon come, he hoped Remy and Pierre could be trusted. Yet these men were also the only devout men in the expedition, allies of either the Jesuits or the Sulpicians. The only man LeSueur felt he could trust was his brother-in-law, Gaston Verdi. First hired to organize the colony and now brought to organize the expedition, Verdi kept to himself much of the time. LeSueur gave him more of an explanation than any other man as to what happened in England, but he did not burden the Montreal merchant with too much information. Perhaps the most dangerous of the entire crew was the young carpenter, Andre Pennicott. Everything about the red-cheeked, blond-haired boy seemed painfully transparent. LeSueur had seen him back on the docks as they loaded the first expedition for its doomed voyage. Apparently, when Pierre Le Moyne came to France for patronage and supplies, he picked up young Pennicott on the same docks. The lad had lived at Fort Maurepas for the past few years before being given to LeSueur. While LeSueur sharpened his axe, young Pennicott sat on the rear deck, smiling and whistling to the point of being repulsive. A few weeks earlier, as they passed the region of the Natchez Indians, Pennicott disappeared. Panic filled the camp as tales of LeSueur's LaSalle's doomed expedition were told. The Natchez Nation blocked France from connecting the upper and lower Mississippi waterway, even though the Treaty of Ryswick made the entire river part of the Kingdom of France. Instead of being found in a grisly state, Pennicott walked back with his arms full of food and a story that the Natchez withdrew up a tributary, which proved to be true. Why do I feel as if Pennicott will be the man who will kill me? LeSueur wondered, remembering the broken-toothed assassin who also came with a smile on his face. Pennicott's head rose like a gopher peeking from a hole. Then the miners all turned. Lastly, the 4 Marines picked up their rifles. "We could use a hand," the Dupree brothers shouted from the bush. Instead of wounded men, the hunters pulled out a massive black bear, which would prove enough food for a month. Even LeSueur had to smile at their good fortune. "Any sign of the Illinois?" "We found some tracks," Remy Dupree said as the other men gathered on the hill. "Nothing to indicate any sizable settlements upstream." "Unlike the other nations in the south, the Illinois will not be frightened off by our ship." "Would you like the fur, Monsieur LeSueur?" Remy Dupree asked as his blade began to process the beast. "It'll make a fine blanket. I've spent many winters out in the North Woods, and I know how to survive. Give it to the boy Pennicott. He's going to need it." That night, with hundreds of pounds of bear meat drying over a fire, the men gorged and sang songs while Sergeant Sajan played his fiddle. On the next morning, as they were about to push off the sandy beach, a single canoe came down the Ohio River waving a white flag. 2 Indians paddled cautiously while a priest in black robes waved his arms. "I am Father Marius. The Cahokia told me a ship full of white men were coming up the river. At first I feared you were Spanish, but now my heart rejoices to see you are Frenchmen." "How can we help you, Father Marius?" Sergeant Sajan asked coldly. "Oh, I have not come to you to beg or borrow, My colleagues and I have set up a mission upstream from here called Timora. Are you Jesuit? Colonnade asked. No, we serve Semiere de Missions Estrangers. The Jesuit Father Gravier is one who is violating his mandate by setting up a mission so close to our mission with the Cahokia. Did you come down the Ohio River? LeSueur asked. We did. Father Pratt is wounded from a Peoria arrow back at the mission, or else he would have come. This is a grand ship. Where are you taking her? North, LeSueur smirked. How far north? As far north as the waters will carry us. May I come with? Now that the Sioux have withdrawn, things are going back to normal. I would love the opportunity to explore the northern branches of the river. The Jesuits seem intent on competing with us for settlement of St. Louis. What do you mean the Sioux have withdrawn? Explain yourself. It was a hard winter, Father Marius said, but with the coming of spring, news came that the Sioux savages returned to their homes to face the Chippewa in the north. If the Dupree brothers are agents of the Jesuits, Father Marius might balance things, unless he's lying. I don't see any harm in letting a priest join us. Welcome aboard, Father Marius. And now the crew is complete, LeSueur thought to himself. Surrounded by so many enemies, LeSueur slept well that night, knowing each faction needed him in the days to come.
Chapter 78, Madeline Island, 1700. Etienne Delhut glanced back a final time to see if the Sioux were following him. Beside him, warriors from the Martin clan of the Chippewa jogged steadily, letting the elder leader set the pace. Adrenaline from the earlier ambush gave his aging legs just enough energy to stay with men half his age. Through the trees, he could see Chequamegon Bay and Madeline Island on the horizon of Lake Superior, a sign he'd soon be able to rest. The jog ended as the ground descended to Pike's Creek and the muddy little bay. The birch bark canoes waited where he'd placed them in the dark hours of the morning, and all seemed right with the world until the whistle of an arrow flew by his head. Delhut's exhausted legs gave way, and he dropped onto the soft floor of the pine forest. That arrow was meant for me alone. The thunder of rifles echoed over his head, and his hands found his loaded pistols. But by the time he cocked one and aimed, a young Sioux stumbled and fell from the brush. Once again, their superior firepower quickly defeated an enemy, but also at a price: disclosure. The Chippewa warriors helped pull Delhut back to his feet, and they hurried to the canoes. 24 musket balls had torn into the flesh of the young Sioux archer, whose bow fell out of his hands where he lay dying. That young man could have put holes in the canoes, but instead he waited to get a shot at me. The Sioux understand their true enemy. The 24 Martin warriors dropped the rifles into the canoes and picked up the paddles. Soon the muddy waters of Pike Bay gave way to the deep channel between the shore and Madeline Island. No sooner had Delhut turned back to look at the wooded shore than another arrow, once again aimed for him, came arching from the shore. He leaned slightly, and the arrow thumped like a drum as it penetrated the blue fabric of the Martin warrior paddling in front of him. After a grunt and glance, the paddling resumed as Delhut watched the blood begin to flow down the man's back. As their war party hurried back to the stronghold of Madeline Island, Delhut watched as the blood dripped onto the canoe, forming a small pool that shifted from stern to aft with each wave. It was a 3-mile crossing, and both the current and waves made it as dangerous as the ambush itself. The attack had been of little strategic importance. A dozen Chippewa armed with rifles killed 4 Sioux scouts on patrol. But the sound would stir the hornet's nest and bring masses of warrior to the area. One of the Martin clan leaders shouted out to the small flotilla. Delhut looked southeast, where they all pointed. The teeth of a trap. 4 dozen canoes, each with 4 or 5 passengers, were in the channel. With 2 miles of open water left to cross, they'd be caught in the open before reaching the protection of the armed snipers along the shore. Birch bark. The Sioux used dugout canoes, and the type paddling away from Madeline Island were the white bark of the birch tree. What is happening? Soon, the larger flotilla vanished behind the skinny reef that formed Schwamagon Bay, dividing it from the angrier waters of Lake Superior. The other canoes paddled away from Madeline Island, heading toward the swampy fields of Bad River. The closer they got to Madeline Island, the larger the waves grew, and soon the bloody pool at Delhut's feet turned pink as waves crashed over the bow of the canoe. Finally, 100 Chippewa figures could be seen around the stronghold of La Pointe, but there were no chants or cheers to greet the war party when it returned home. No sooner had the nose struck the gravel of shore did the warrior in the bow of the boat fall forward, quickly picked up by the friends and relatives gathered in anticipation. Other Chippewa helped Delhut to his feet, and food and beverages were prepared in tribute. Exhaustion seeped into Etienne Delhut's body as he listened to the Chippewa tell the accounts of the ambush to the families. He yearned for his own family far away in distant Montreal, but he knew the sacrifices that needed to be made. To the French trappers and traders, Etienne Delhut was a god amongst men, even at his age. Leading an ambush cemented his legacy for another generation who had not seen him rescue missionaries from certain death in the past. Now, can someone please explain to me why I saw so many canoes leaving the island? He asked, and all eyes averted the answer. The plan had been simple. The Chippewa nation would inhabit the Apostle Islands for the defensive positions while they went to war with the vile Sioux. French ships brought food, supplies, and new Chippewa residents. Although supplied, the Apostle Islands population now burst at the seams. Concentrated upon the islands, the Chippewa position remained unflexing season after season, while the Sioux had to defend thousands of square miles of southern shore. Raids like the one earlier that morning lured more and more Sioux into the escalating conflict. Although the Lemoyne family endured a restricted fur trade market, the earlier export of furs brought a steady influx of modern weapons into the hands of the Chippewa. Decades earlier, Eos chose the Chippewa as their weapon against the Sioux, but their financial partnership changed the hardened warriors. An entire generation had been born and raised on Madeline Island, never knowing the rigors of westward migration. From that sedentary life, a cancer grew in the hearts of the people. Delhut ignored the whispers about the Wijigan clan, but seeing the flotilla of canoes, he knew something terrible had happened on the island. A small group of elders from the Martin, Bear, Crane, Loon, and Catfish clans led him to an abandoned camp hidden in the pines behind the main village. Delhut knelt down in front of the atrocity. The coals were still warm and the meat still crisp upon the bones, which in this case was a large human femur. This threatens everything the Order of Eos has built. It was easy to gauge the temperatures of the elders, who wanted the French to take the blame for their part in the atrocity. Wendigo, Chief Shingwabwe muttered. This is the work of the Wijigan, another said. Delhut looked around the empty camp of Chief Bequinas. Suddenly, he understood the flotilla of canoes heading for the mainland. Along with the roasting flesh, he saw 3 fresh corpses along the edges of the remote village. So what happened? The Wijigan priests gave poison to our ill, and once we buried them, they came and dug them up, bringing them here to perform their heretical rituals. Dark rumors always surrounded the Wijigan clan, especially their priests. Even when gathered at the Apostle Islands, the mysterious clan of Chief Bequinas kept to itself, choosing to isolate on one of the smallest islands. Now the reason became obvious. Why would they do such a thing? Had the French fathers not fed, clothed, and provided for the people? Delhat asked. The clan elders did not answer. Why? He repeated. Chief Shinguabe answered. The Wijigan hoped that their dark rituals could give them power over the whole nation, not just their clan. The Feast of Flesh was intended to give them strength enough to defeat the Sioux without the help of the French. A coup to supplant me. It appears as if sanity prevailed amongst the other clans. After they were discovered, a violent struggle ensued, and when more of our men arrived, the Wijigan fled prior to your arrival. Now they are outcasts from our society. As it should be, Delhat agreed. With French weapons, we slaughtered a patrol of Sioux with only one of our men wounded. If your people are patient, we will give you the land of the Blue Woman so that you might find Turtle Island and fulfill the prophecies of the Seven Fires. Trust your French fathers, and we will help you defeat your final enemy. Trust. Delhat trusted. He trusted that hundreds of miles south of Madeline Island, Pierre-Charles LeSueur took advantage of all the chaos around Lake Superior to sneak into the Haunted Valley. And he trusted that LeSueur would do the right thing when he unearthed the Philosopher's Stone, or else cannibalism and evil spirits would take hold of the whole country. Chapter 79. Lake Pepin, August 4th, 1700. Could I fight my way out? LeSueur wondered. If Wapashaw's Sioux finds us, the expedition would be destroyed, but Montreal would only send another in my stead. Ostie. In the valley below the ridge, a small camp of Sioux began to stir. LeSueur turned to Gaston Verdi, the Dupree brothers, and his 4 Marines under the command of Sergeant Sagen. Last night was a full moon. My guess is that they were told to stay at the mouth of the Standing Rock River until the full moon. They are all young boys looking to prove themselves. So now what? Sergeant Sagen asked. We have a short window to get the ship up the Mississippi River and onto Perot's River with the full moon. The Sioux will be gathered for their fall hunts. And then what? We pray for luck. Back on the felucca, with all 20 men listening, LeSueur explained his plan. If we are going to sneak into the back door, the stars have aligned for us. All the men are off to the east fighting wars with the Chippewa, Fox, Menominee, and the other tribe that pushed into Sioux territory. But soon their focus will turn to hunting buffalo. The way I see it, we have 2 choices. We can abandon the felucca here and hike over land, or we can swing north and try to find Perot's River. Wait, Sergeant Sagen interrupted. You've never been on this river? How many times have you been on to the Haunted Valley, Sagen? LeSueur asked. Now, I know exactly where we are and where we have to go. I know that in a few months, Chief Wapashaw will flood this valley with thousands of experienced warriors. Just as I am sure there are young braves coming down the Standing Rock River. I am even more positive that they would find our ship hiding in these swamps. So we must find Perot's River. Colin Nain cast his vote for the alternative. Nain's miners fear getting off the felucca. As much as we need stealth, we also need this ship. It is a visual reminder of the might and majesty of France. However fragile that illusion might be, it might save our necks if we are spotted. I thought your ability to speak to the Sioux was what would save our necks, Sagen mattered. One thing's for sure, Sagen is more military than Eos, regardless of who hired him. From what I know, the Minnesota is large enough to let us bring the felucca upriver, but Perot said the mouth was almost hidden by an island. Whoever spots the delta will have a river named after him. The St. Andre River, Andre Pennicott offered and rushed to the prow, followed by other young men. The older men gathered midship. I think LeSueur has a good plan, Father Marius finally spoke up. If the Sioux discover us and treat us hostilely, this felucca might be the only thing to save our lives. I'd hate to think of us having to lug all our equipment any distance over land, Colonnade added. LeSueur turned to Sergeant Sagen for comment. D'Iberville should have sent me with more men, Sagen protested. This mission will not succeed by force, LeSueur reminded him. Now we need a little luck. The felucca entered Lake Pepin just after dusk with the light of the moon guiding her way. The shores of the lake were ominously dark, but LeSueur could see them as clearly as if 1,000 stars focused upon them. He could see the ridge where he and Winona had hidden from her brothers as he cupped her mouth. He could see the little stone house where the maps indicated Fort Antoine stood in the wilderness. He felt the same chill in his soul as he felt the day he and Perrault had been captured. As they passed the sheer cliff along the eastern shore, he closed his eyes, picturing Kiox's pyres. Light grew with the arrival of dawn, and the river channel narrowed to just a few hundred yards. With the sails hidden, 16 men kept the felucca moving as swiftly as they could. LeSueur stood in the prow, pointing out obstacles in the current. Beside him, Father Marius, Andre Pennicott, and Pierre Dupuy kept watch for the hidden access to the long river. Tall bluffs looked down on them as they passed, but the Sioux did not. There, Pierre Dupuy shouted. Do you see how muddy the water is by the shore? All 5 of them focused on the shore. With a few downed cottonwoods on both sides, the mouth of the river looked like a backwater swamp. I think you are right. We found it, men. Hard left. The felucca turned into the turbid waters, and for a few minutes no one spoke. Even LeSueur worried it was just shallow side of an island. But then the river kept turning south. They traveled almost 2 miles before LeSueur saw a shallow marsh marking the back side of the island, and beyond it, the Mississippi flowing north. This is it, LeSueur confirmed. Good eyes, Pierre. It is no wonder you are such a marksman. Father Marius, let us name this river after our esteemed hunter. Father Marius nodded. Then we will call it the St. Pierre River. Whether the St. Pierre, the Minnesota, or Perrault's River, LeSueur knew he could count on it to steadily flow from the south for quite a while. But somewhere far to the south, it would bend sharply and flow dramatically from the north. There he would find Makato, where the earth bled blue, and the haunted valley, and finally, Yonkalo, the river of death.